Life isn't fair. Justice is blind and dysfunctional. And some cops aren't smart and dedicated, like on television. This is Who Killed Teresa.
Said you took a big trip. They said you moved away. Happened oh so quietly, they say. Shoulda took a picture, something I could keep. Buy a little frame, something cheap.
I'm in, I guess this is day 12 of a 14-day quarantine in Atlantic Canada. I'll tell you why I'm here a little later. But this story today has a New Brunswick angle, so we might as well tell it. I'll also say I'm not in my studio. I'm actually in this historic home. I guess it was... Sorry. Fire alarms. I guess it was built in the late 1800s. Everything in St. John, New Brunswick was kind of built after 1877. There was... a great fire in 1877 that basically burned down downtown St. John, the south end of St. John. So everything here is after that. And I'm staying in, I guess it's a rooming house, you would call it, in St. John. But I brought a mobile unit. But some of the background sounds maybe a little funky. Quality might not be as good as usual. Maybe it'll be better. Who knows? Oh boy, there's a police crew outside, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. This should be interesting. The lights are flashing. Should I go investigate? No, I'll stay here. Let's get right to it. So, the first half, I'll tell this story that actually I've known about this for a long time, probably a decade now, and waiting for the right opportunity to tell it. It concerns both, like 1978 Eastern Townships of Quebec, and coincidentally, New Brunswick, Canada, at the tail end. So, in the book Wish You Were Here, and this concerned a lot subject matter of the last podcast, Patricia Pearson and I, we raised the question whether Luc Gregoire, the offender with the violent criminal history in Sherbrooke, Quebec, who went on to murder in Calgary, was possibly forced out of the Eastern Townships area. Did someone or some party decide that Gregoire was just too big a problem for Sherbrooke and push him out of town, leaving him to become someone else's problem? And that's a very interesting question for any small region, right? You just sort of like, if you got a problem, just leave them, at the gates of the city and hope they move on. And very early on, I think one of the first book events we did was at Brome Lake Books in Knowlton, and I began that reading, I guess somewhat bizarrely, by reading an excerpt from the Sherbrooke Record newspaper this small story that appeared in September 1978 that was a warning to parents and children to be vigilant in the wake of a series of indecent exposure incidents that occurred in the Lennoxville area in the fall of 1978. And as I say, that it was sort of like a precursor for everything that bad that followed. What I didn't say about that was that it was written by a guy named Bill Morton, who at that time penned a weekly kind of talk of the town column for the Record titled Crossroads. And if you weren't at that event, you probably weren't. I'll just read it. It's a very brief article that appeared in the Record. It's called Lennoxville Crossroads by Bill Morton. Police patrol schools. Vigilance. After 3 incidents of indecent exposure, the Lennoxville police have set up surveillance of local schools. They are investigating any suspicious cars or persons in the area. Chief Hamel suggests parents teach their children these rules. Stay away from strangers offering candy or rides in their car. Report anybody who acts strangely to you or their teacher immediately. Copy down the license plate number of any car they think is suspicious. If your child is involved in an incident, don't panic. Call the police. Listen to all your child has to say, and don't get angry. It's not the child's fault. He or she is the victim. You can help by keeping a close watch in your area and keep your notepad ready. Now, as I said, so that was written by Bill Morton. And Morton was an interesting townships character. He claimed to be, at that time, an ordained minister, though in the newspapers he only was ever referred to as Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton! During the day, he studied theology at Bishop's University in Lennoxville, and at night he worked at an institution for the mentally disabled near Dixville, Quebec, and that's about 20 kilometers directly south of Compton. And I've compiled like a brief summary of Bill Morton's work in 1978-79. He only had the column Crossroads for that year. And it was sort of every week, as I say, kind of talk of the town, townshippers, this is what's going on. But he had some interesting things to say that I'll kind of summarize here. So on October 4th, 1978, Bill's parting thought, in quotes, was, "The worst crook is the one who betrays our trust." So that's interesting, Bill. I'm not sure why you're saying that, but there it is. Then on October 12th, which coincidentally was my sister's birthday, Bill writes, note, "I can see no good reason to abolish our police force to hire what would probably be a poorer quality protection. However, some people might be afraid of what a police force dedicated to this town might dig up." And I don't know what Bill was driving at. Perhaps he knew something. Would have been interesting for him to enlighten us. Nevertheless, in December of 1978, so this is after my sister has disappeared, but has not yet been found, he manages a brief address of Teresa's case. And he says, in the fall, Champlain student Teresa Lore disappeared. Her parents still pray for her return, although police admit they're totally stymied. Not going to offer a comment on police being stymied, but I think you know my thoughts and feelings on that one by this point. So then in January of 1979, commenting on an annual town council open meeting, Bill writes that Alderman Robert Calder reported on the achievements of both the police and the fire department. All agreed that both departments were doing a fine job. So now he's like toting the party line. Then in late February, Bill pens a column railing against the perils of drugs and prostitution, while praising the work of public safety. Through no fault of the police, he says, and he's widely criticized for this column. With one letter to the editor accusing him of being, quote, a crackpot. By March of 1979, Bill is skipping columns. And then in April 1979, so in the spring, he celebrates the first anniversary of his Crossroads column, ending with this ominous proverb. He says, quote, a malicious man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. And that is his final Crossroads column until the event. The event which occurs on April 27th, 1979. For context, it's worth noting that my sister's body was found April 13th, 1979. So on Friday, April 27th, 1979, Reverend Bill Morton attacked his supervisor at the Dixville Home for the Handicapped. And according to the victim's daughter, who related this story to me years later, Morton entered the kitchen of the facility clutching a rolling pin behind his back. When the victim, his supervisor, asked what he was doing with the rolling pin, Bill replied he was going to bang apart some frozen orange juice in the freezer. When the woman turned to leave, Bill Morton grabbed her by the arm and said, I have to do this. He then beat her about the head with the rolling pin and began to strangle her until she was unconscious. Mr. Morton with the rolling pin. Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the rolling pin says, it does. Oh, excuse me, my alarm's going off. This is the way it goes live. So yes, the tale of Bill Morton. The daughter of this woman who was attacked recounted to me how the Sherbrooke Record wrote an article about this incident, but, quote, failed to identify Bill because they felt sympathetic to him. She goes on, "What happened to my mother was brushed aside with a shrug. Oh, she'll get over it." Prior to the attack, Bill had actually discussed my sister Teresa's case with the supervisor he attacked. Teresa, as I said, had only recently been found in a ditch in Compton. And Bill's remark to the supervisor was that, quote, "She had probably deserved it," which surprised the woman, as she was under the belief that he was a minister and a religious man. So, as I say, that story was related to me in an email years ago, and it's only through technology. It's only been fairly recently that the Sherbrooke Record newspaper was offered online. Prior to a couple of years ago, I would have to go either to the Quebec Library in Montreal or to the archives in Sherbrooke in order to find microfiche copies of the record. Since it was online, it's only very, very recently, after writing "Wish You Were Here," that I had the time to kind of go, "Oh yeah, that Morton thing. Didn't that woman reference an article? I wonder if I could find that article that anonymously refers to Bill Morton, doesn't directly address him." And sure enough, I tracked it down. And it is a sight to behold. It's authored by Jim Duff, a longtime reporter for the Record, and then with the Montreal Gazette. Jim Duff currently is a municipal councillor for Heights East, town of Hudson, Quebec. He's quite a prominent councillor. I believe we're Facebook friends because years ago he told me how sorry he was for what had transpired with my sister. And this article, far from being an account of a brutal attack on an unsuspecting victim, it is a cry for help plea for the perpetrator, for Bill Morton, and a complete defense of his actions. All of it protecting his identity, never disclosing his name. Duff begins the piece, and it's a very lengthy column, titled "Care for the Carers." It's about time. And I've posted the full article online. And it begins something like this. It follows, it goes, "A friend and former colleague of mine who works at a local home for the handicapped went berserk last week and attacked his supervisor." Duff goes on to say how Morton was charged with murder and taken to the psychiatric wing of the Sherbrooke Hospital to determine if he was mentally capable of standing trial. A friend of Morton summarizes the situation to the Record this way. And he's identified blankly. So when you want to say, "Mr. Morton," it's just a long line. So the long line just had a breakdown, said Vera Simmons, a close friend of the couple, asking that we keep names out of it. "Their friends all know about it anyway, and it's no business of anybody else's. There should be more concern for people in a stressful kind of job. We can get together as a group of friends, but we wish there were some kind of structure, some kind of leader. The personnel director of the Dixville home for the psychiatric, criminally insane, I guess now we'd call it a wellness clinic. It sounds very much, given Morton's situation, that the lunatic was in charge of the asylum. So the director of the place, Tom Robinson, elaborates. He says, what sets a guy off suddenly? This isn't an easy job for somebody who is sensitive and gets involved with the kids. I guess it was a juvenile psychiatric home. His wife's pregnant, and I understand he's building a new house. He works nights to put himself through bishops. I believe he's interested in theology. He was taking on an awful lot. Concerning the victim, Robinson, the director of the Dixville home, has this to say. We feel very strongly for him. But between him and his supervisor, his damages are more serious. Her cuts and bruises will heal in a month or two. But what he did will keep coming back for years. And indeed it will. Indeed it will, Mr. Robinson. And then we go back to Duff, to Jim Duff. Duff continues. He says, while the supervisor collects workman's compensation for suffering a job-induced injury, there's no such provision in Bill's case. But of course, Bill's not identified. In Blank's case, yes, what about his compensation for the suffering he endured beating the woman with a rolling pin? Now, as I stated, Morton was assessed as to his mental faculties, his ability to stand trial, but no trial appears to have ever taken place. There's never any mention of Bill Morton in the Eastern Townships of Quebec again in the papers. Bill Morton simply disappears. And you might say, so what's the problem with that? It's different times. We weren't sensitive to victims back then. This guy had a bad spell. He's under stress. He tipped. His friends helped him. Good that things were kept quiet. Good that they kept his name out of the papers. They just took a problem and they made it go away. Well, that was the end of Sherbrooke's problem. But it wasn't the end of Bill Morton. See, Bill Morton moved on to another province, to New Brunswick. In November 2015, Morton, by then an actual ordained minister at Christ Church in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, assaulted a woman in his parish with whom he had been having a 4-year extramarital affair. Threatened with the termination of their relationship, Morton showed up at her home and cut her breasts and abdomen with a box cutter, ranting that he would, quote, skin her alive. Then came a second assault in December 2015 when Morton attacked her again and tried to slit her throat. Similar to the 1979 Sherbrooke incident, Morton was ordered to undergo a 30-day psychiatric assessment. He later pleaded not guilty in St. John Provincial Court to 2 counts of assault with a weapon, but later changed his plea to guilty. He was handed 2 15-month conditional sentences, essentially soft house arrest that stipulated he attend a rehabilitation program and counseling, abstain from alcohol, and report to a parole supervisor. His victim, Cynthia May Moore, eventually sued Morton, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Anglican Diocese of Fredericton, and the Anglican Parish of St. Stephen. Bill Morton's damage was more serious. He should have been confronted by the people of the Eastern Townships at the moment the problem presented itself, so that one more woman wouldn't have to suffer abuse, intimidation, and violence.
Streets stand for more, empty, smell metal, weeds between buildings, pictures on my hard drive, but I'm the luckiest guy. Not the loneliest guy.
The reason I'm in quarantine in Atlantic Canada and not in the United States is my father died. So I had to come here, and when you do, they immediately they take the current situation very, very seriously, as they should, and they put you in quarantine for 14 days, which is very strange. It's like being in a state of suspended animation before I can get out and tend to my father's affairs and be with my mother on a more long-term basis until Christmas, and I wouldn't normally bring that up. Passing of my father's, it's not the same as the death of Teresa in any respect. He lived a very long, fulfilled life in some ways. Lived to 87, so it's not really the subject of this, except in the sense that, in thinking about it, my father does come up an awful lot in the podcast, so I should say a few things. So as I say, I drove up. This is my 12th day of, I'm losing count, of quarantine. So almost 2 weeks ago, from North Carolina, up Highway 95, at Bangor, Maine, you hang a right and take Highway 9, and the border is at Calais, Maine. You cross the river into St. Stephen, New Brunswick. So St. Stephen, where Mr. Morton. That's the second time Schoolhouse Rock has come up lately in this podcast. We had Figure 8 a couple of weeks back, and now we have the tale of Mr. Morton. It's becoming a theme. I won't let it. So St. Stephen and then St. John, New Brunswick is about an hour drive from the Maine border, and I'm in a rooming house here, old turn of the century house, as I said, overlooking a great sense of humor here, overlooking the site of the old train station in St. John where I last saw my sister Teresa alive. So, very good sense of humor. I do appreciate that. That road, Highway 9, between Bangor, Maine, and the Canadian border. It's a very long, I think, hour and a half drive. It's an old logging road. I was thinking driving in, a lot of history on that road. I've driven a lot of times. It certainly would have been the route we took when my parents dropped me in a car and we drove to Sherbrooke after Teresa disappeared. That would have been the way we went. I remember driving it with John Slattery when we went to see David Bowie. The Let's Dance tour at the Montreal Forum. That's how we got there from St. John. And then later, certainly when I was living in the United States, sometimes in order to avoid expensive airfare, international fares, rather than flying in for Christmas and the holidays to Toronto, then St. John, you'd fly to Bangor from Los Angeles or Houston, New York, and my dad would pick me up at the Bangor airport, and then we'd take that long drive to St. John. Certainly done that. And then later, I mean, as recently, the last time I was here was 2 years ago. I flew into Bangor. I rented a car, Banger. Your girlfriend? No, it's Banger. How's that joke go? This old joke about Bangor, Maine. No, we're just friends. Anyway, I rented a car. I drove in. Patricia Pearson met me here, and that was 2 years ago. They did it. My mom did an interview with with Patricia for the book, and we were here for about 3 days. The last time I saw my father was the eve of the Quebec election there, when watching the returns when Legault won. I remember staying up late with him and then leaving the next morning. That's the last time I saw him. He got sick and was hospitalized just before Wish You Were Here was published, and then died on November 10th in the St. John Hospital. I was not here for that. My brother was at his side and held his hand until he passed. A lot of people have said, like he must have been so proud of you and the book and all that. That's not the case at all. The writing of that book was not, it was by no means my lifelong achievement. It certainly wasn't his. I don't think he was even aware of the book. I certainly didn't give it to him. There was a period there where my parents, both my mom and dad, were very generous in sharing their experience back from 1978. But as I think I've said before, I have all of my dad's notes. I certainly didn't need to repeatedly grill and traumatize him over those events. And in the final, say, 5 to 10 years of his life, we barely spoke about it. I refused to, and I certainly wasn't going to give him a catalog of what was daily going on in the publishing world, or any of that. In the final year, I don't even think he was aware that at one point he was aware he was writing a book. But in the end, he wasn't aware of it. And nor was I going to bother him with it. I've sort of said that he lived that experience. Neither of my parents needed to read that. That's the stuff of like a really cheap and bad made-for-TV movie. That's not reality in any way. So, in fact, for his birthday, somebody said, "You must have given him your book." No, I didn't give him my book. You out of your mind? What kind of a gift is that? I gave him a Louise Penny novel, Bury Your Dead. If you don't know Louise Penny, she's a detective, right? Canadian writer, but internationally famous. Creator of Chief Inspector Armand Gamache of the Sûreté du Québec, actually. And when I first became aware of Louise Penny, it was with a great deal of hostility, because he's like this hero cop, in the mold of Auguste Dupin, is that his name, in the Murders of Rue Morgue, Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. He's in that mold, or Hercule Poirot. Always solves the crime, this kind of stuff. And so, as you can imagine, my immediate reaction before reading it to any Louise Penny novel was that this was truly the stuff of fiction. I never knew a Sûreté du Québec detective anything like that, with that degree of resolve and integrity. Nevertheless, I read Bury Your Dead, which is sort of set while Gamache is convalescing in Quebec City and works on solving the case of what happened to the remains of Champlain, right? Samuel Champlain. Where were his remains buried? And I, against my demons, I really liked it. In fact, I still like Louise Penny a lot. So for his birthday, I gave him Bury Your Dead. I thought he would really like it. He never got to read it. He got too sick too quickly. But as fate would have it, my mom is reading it now. So I will go over each morning, and we will sit at like a 10-foot distance from each other in the lobby of her of her condo building with masks on, and talk about things. And she'll talk about where she is in the book and how much she's enjoying it. And yes, it's ironic that she would enjoy, she says, a book about this great Sûreté de Quebec detective. But there it is. There it is. So the other interesting thing, when I got here, because in quarantine there's limited choices of what to do. You can go out in public, but you can't interact in public. You can't go into any building. You can't shop. I can't go to the St. John Market. Can't go to any retail establishment. I've likened it to, you sort of wander the streets when no one is around, typically, at dawn or dusk. just sort of peering into windows and things, kind of like a ghost roaming the city of St. John. It's very strange. But with limited choices, you begin to focus on, the natural landscape. And one of the places I love here is the Irving Park, sometimes called the Irving Nature Preserve. It's a large park on the west side of town that the Irving family donated to the city. It managed to save one tract of lumber for the people while cutting all the others down. I'm sorry, that's a cheap shot at the Irvings, but and it's a beautiful park, with all kinds of walking paths right on the ocean, right on the Bay of Fundy, I've been there before. I've been there with my kids and that, and as I say, my brother was here just before me, and he was like, "You got to get out there," and so immediately, in order to keep one occupied, I brought a mountain bike, so try to find the most expedient and efficient way of cycling there, which is not easy. St. John, given urban renewal like a lot of cities from the 50s, is bifurcated in many places by highways. So cycling there is not a bike-friendly culture by any means. But nevertheless, I did manage to find the most, efficient, road-friendly way to get to the park, which I think is, about a 10-kilometer ride away? It's not bad. But in order to get there, just so you know, you need to... So there's a harborfront trail, the Green Trail, that you can follow. Then you go past, like the steelworks, up to the Reversing Falls Bridge. Reversing Falls, the eighth wonder of the world, according to anyone in the Maritimes. You cross the bridge, and at the bridge, you hang a left at Sims Corner. Sims Corner, the most dangerous traffic corner in St. John. One of the most dangerous anywhere. You take your life in your hand. It's right by the pulp and paper mill. Also, of course, owned by the Irving family. Everything here is owned by the Irvings. The oil refinery, right? The docks. It's an industrial town. And so you hang a left, and right where the Reversing Falls pulp and paper mill is, and there's a hill there. There's a lookout that is interesting. We'll get back to that. You cross Highway 1, and then I found a place. It's called Sandy Cove Road, that kind of winds until you get to the Irving Park, and along Sandy Cove Road, which begins suburban and gets increasingly rural, then turns slightly industrial. Then there's cemeteries out there overlooking the coast, right? And then a long beach, and then the park, and so a lot of curiosities along the way. And one of the things that struck me is there's like on the side of the road not facing the ocean, there's an obelisk in an open field with what looks like tombstones around it, so and a marker. So on one of the occasions, I rode out there. I said, "Well, I wonder what this is." So I go and look, and it states that this is the burial grounds for the site of the former residence of the provincial hospital. And whenever you read something like provincial hospital, you realize that that's code for something, immediately I thought, well, that's code for the loony bin. It certainly is. It certainly is. So the psychiatric hospital, and this is a geography lesson that a podcast will not do this justice, and I may do a little movie of this to kind of, because it's kind of funny and weird. So this was the burial ground for this psychiatric hospital, which used to be located on that hill at Sims Corner, Reversing Falls. It was a massive psychiatric hospital there at one time or another. I mean, I was there when I was little. Later became known as Centracare. It eventually became run down, and they moved Centracare further out around, what is that? Behind Manawaganish Road is where Centracare is now. But it had all the trimmings of a crazy lunatic asylum. I mean, the stories of it being haunted and ghosts and all of that when I was a kid were well known. But the plot out on Sandy Cove Road, I learned, was the loony bins. And you know what? I'm not going to be politically correct. I'm just going to use the terminology of the time, because that's what they called it at the time, the lunatic asylum. So that was known as the annex. So they had a farm out there for about 300 inmates because it was overflowing. I think at one time it held 1,500 people, some of whom needed psychiatric care, some of whom were, as you would imagine, were just criminals. You know, the women mixed with the men, children mixed with adults, and you can just imagine. And what's left of so they had this farm out there where they, good intentions, grew their own vegetables and produce and things like this, which supplied the main hospital. But what remains is interesting. All of the markers that are left were made of wood, very, very primitive markings where some inmates were laid to rest out there. And then, so this got me thinking. I started to explore the region and found across the street from it is this big green barn, also owned by the Irvings. It's where they keep some of their general services vehicles and stuff. And behind the barn are all these large stone foundations of a building. And I was like, well, what the hell is this? Just strewn everywhere. And at one point I'm like scavenging around and came across in the forest like the stone of a gargoyle. It's like, it was like Sulla in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? When he takes the torch and he looks in the hole and it was a real Sulla moment to see this thing. Again, and I sort of mentioned this online. I started feeling like Emily Thompson. Those of you who know Emily, who is Irish and has the podcast Morbidology, and is quite an explorer of old buildings and stuff. I think she's been to Chernobyl. She goes everywhere. She's one of those people, right? Fascinating. I started feeling like Emily Thompson, poking around in these remains, and come to find that that's the old custom house. When they tore it down, it used to be in downtown St. John. They tore it down, and just carted it off here to Sandy Cove Road, and dumped all these remains. That's I'd be cynical and say that's how St. John takes care of its cultural heritage, but that's being unkind. St. John, for a not affluent city, has done a pretty amazing job of preserving a lot of its heritage. So, for whatever reason, they thought to take down the custom house, which is, when you landed on a boat, you'd clear customs. Obviously, it's right on the wharf. You'd come to the custom house. Pictures of it, a beautiful old building, I think, behind St. John High. Was taken down, I think, in the 1920s, 1930s. So it's there. Come to find that the old jail is not there. Is the remains of the old jail are up at an old dump near where I'm staying. So there's all these curiosities. And then I sort of said, coming in on Sandy Cove Road, part of it is industrialized, and there's a facility out there that I don't know, was really kind of curious to me. I couldn't quite figure it out. It looked kind of, I don't know, kind of modern. And I was like, well, what is this thing? What is this thing now? It has a weird name today. I'm trying to find it. What's it called? It's called the Maritime Opportunity Center. And there's all kinds of things in there, from I think a doggy daycare to storage facility. And it's this huge complex. It looks like from the 60s. Well, that was the old juvenile psychiatric hospital. So this is Looney Bin Row, Sandy Cove Road, to say the least. Julia Wright, who is a reporter with CBC St. John, did a article, and I know this because I've been in quarantine, so I've had the opportunity to read everything in the last 10 to 12 days. She wrote an article for Vice magazine called Eerie Photos from Inside a Former Children's Psychiatric Hospital. Some claim the former hospital, with its history of abuse and neglect, is haunted. Others think it's a great place for a doggy daycare. And the place does look, creepy as hell. Definitely. So, this got me on, a whole tangent, as you would believe, of psychiatric care and loony bins, right? Insane asylums, which is where we started with Bill Morton, working at the facility in Dixville, ironically. But then I began to do a little research and found that neither this juvenile facility nor the facility at Sims Corner were the original psychiatric hospital. There was an original madhouse in St. John, New Brunswick. And it was a former, I wouldn't call it army barracks, but it's where you house troops for a while. Built, I believe, in 1834, the 1830s. And I found it was built at the corner of Leinster Street and Wentworth. So I went to Leinster Street and Wentworth. The original building wouldn't be there because it's built in the 1830s. Great Fire of St. John happened in 1877, so all of it would have burnt down. But at that corner, there is now is a beautiful old building from 1899, which is now the Jewish Museum of St. John. When I lived there, it was a funeral parlor. And then across the street from it used to be an old Gothic cathedral, also from the 1800 post-fire. That has since been torn down, and they're turning it into some condos. But I bring up the corner of Wentworth and Leinster because I grew up on Leinster. In fact, the site of the original lunatic asylum in St. John is 2.5 houses up from my house, 112 Leinster Street. So there you go. We come full circle. Full circle on my exploratory quarantine journey into St. John's past. The other thing I'll bring up is from the South End in St. John. Certainly from Sandy Cove Road, if you look out into the Bay of Fundy, you can see Partridge Island. There's a break wall that kind of connects it, but you're not allowed out there anymore. Partridge Island was the internment center for immigrants to St. John. Most notably during the famines in Ireland, 1840s to the 50s. A lot of Irish were interned on Partridge Island and died there due to famine and cholera, etc. So you can see Partridge Island Irish. My mom's people are from Northern Ireland, but would have come over pre-famine. Well, I think there was always a famine. They would have come over in the 20s and 30s, and I don't think they came to St. John. I think they went directly to Quebec and then to Southern Ontario. But certainly got me thinking about Emily Thompson, who is Irish, and perhaps some of her ancestors ended up in St. John, New Brunswick. Who knows? Who knows the connections that are possible? I'll share one story about my dad, a funny story, because my, as I say, I didn't really ever talk to my dad about tragedy, except for a very concentrated period. We mostly talked about on Sundays. I phone him every Sunday. We talk about sports and easy politics and stuff like that. But my dad was an engineer all his life. He actually came to St. John because he was a construction manager for the Point Lepreau nuclear power station. I used to kind of joke he was Homer Simpson. That's really unfair. He was the construction manager. He was much more than Homer Simpson. But I brought up the pulp and paper mill. For anyone who has grown up in a town with a pulp and paper mill, I'm thinking Elmer, Quebec. I'm thinking Cornwall, Ontario. The stench is quite overwhelming, and has always been an obstacle to these facilities. And one time in St. John, they got a bunch of experts and engineers together in a room, including my father, to somehow perhaps resolve the problem of the smell that emanated from the St. John Pulp and Paper Mill, the Irving Pulp and Paper Mill. And so there's a bunch of them around this boardroom table brainstorming. And at one point, a woman suggests, she says, what about this? What if you took like a large industrial-sized hose or tubing. And rather than the smoke and the smell emulating into the atmosphere, you detoured it and funneled it directly into the St. John River. And so all that exhaust would go into the water as opposed as into the air. And at this point, one of the mucky mucks in the room interjected, "Madam, have you ever tried to fart in a bathtub in order to disguise the smell?" That is one of my favorite stories from my father, from his engineering days, most definitely. Story of Bill Morton, and then some thoughts on my father, St. John. I'll end with this. One point we're talking about the author Louise Penny. As I said, Louise Penny is very, very well known. You may not know her, but she's one of these authors that, once the book clubs key into your works, that's it. You're set for life. And every book club is keyed in. Well, my mom is keyed in, right? She's telling me daily what's going on. It's great. It's great writing. It's great storytelling. So pre-COVID, I was doing the rounds in North Carolina, in the Raleigh-Durham region of the independent bookstores. I was going to readings and things like that, and I went to a reading. The guy, is it David Zuccario? I'm pronouncing it wrong. The author of Wilmington's Lie, the book about the Wilmington Massacre. I went to a reading of his at McIntyre Books outside of Chapel Hill. And it was a whole festival that was going on. And, there was a large, there's photos or those kind of drawings of authors all around this big, big room where they have readings. And one of them was of Louise Penny. And I'm mingling and I'm talking to people, and, it comes out that I'm from Quebec, and there's, a bunch of these women who kind of look like, I don't know, Mrs. Marpole or something, and so they get very, very interested that I grew up in Quebec, and they, oh, do you know Louise Penny? And you don't. I don't know Louise Penny, but have you been to Three Pines? Three Pines is like this fictional little village in the Eastern Townships. It stands in her novels for Knowlton, Quebec, actually, and the look of disappointment on their face when I said I was from Quebec and actually didn't know Louise and had never been to Three Pines. Was kind of devastating. No, I didn't know Armand Gamache personally because he doesn't exist. But eventually, you begin to think, well, why not give him a thrill? And why not just go along with it? Right? Oh, no, of course I know her, Yeah, she's my aunt, right? Three Pines is actually where my sister died. And in fact, she wrote a novel about it. There's a novelized version of the death of Teresa Allure, right? I mean, give him a thrill. Why not? Why not, right? It reminds me, a number of years ago, my ex-wife Elizabeth's father died. Her father died in a very tragic accident. And I was at the wake at this church in Chapel Hill. And because I was the ex-husband and because I was there, a lot of people didn't know who I was. And I was standing with Elizabeth and with our children, as I would be. So a lot of people came up, and saw me there and didn't know who I was. So they just assumed that I was Elizabeth's brother. They were like, "Oh, you must be Ted." And then when I told them, "No, I'm not Ted. I'm Elizabeth's ex-husband." Immediately the stink eye, right? Immediately, the conversation would drop. People would still, look awkwardly at their serviettes, say they have to go and get some more punch. And it just became, this is true, it became so unbearably awful that, by this third time when somebody said, "Oh, you must be Ted," I just said, yeah, I'm Ted. I'm Ted, and these are my nieces. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Yeah, it's very sad. Sorry for the loss of my father. He was a great man. It was great having him as a dad. Thank you for your condolences. Yeah. You gotta laugh. This is Who Killed Teresa. If you like the podcast, please give us a good rating on, I don't know, I'm so over this shit of marketing. If you like it, there's a website. That's maybe the most important thing. TeresaAllure.com, TheresaAllure.com. That's where I'll put the full articles, the very extensive articles on Bill Morton from the Sherbrooke Record. That's kind of the only visual content I have for today. If you go to the website, you can find out where to find other things on social media. I'll just say that. Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. There's a couple of things coming up that I should mention this week. This is Thanksgiving week in the United States. Although who gives a shit, because I'm in Canada. I never really care for the holiday anyway, personally. But I think today, actually this day, there's an article coming out in the St. John paper, the Telegraph Journal. There's a piece I wrote for the Sherbrooke Record, actually, coming out either tomorrow or Friday. And then tomorrow, I'm speaking with a reporter from La Presse in Quebec, La Presse, a newspaper, French newspaper, to hopefully build some traction for Wish You Were Here in Quebec French press, which will be a good thing. I think that's the first article in the French press. These things take a long time. Take a very, very long time. That's all for this time. This is Who Killed Teresa. I'm the host, John Allure. Have yourselves a great day.
Come blow me away. I don't care much. I win anyway. Just a dog. I'm goddamn rich. talk in the night. There's oil on my hands, what a dog. All dog is cruel and smart. Smart time breaks the heart. Full dog bombs the moon. Devil in the marketplace. Devil in your bleeding face. Full dog bombs the moon. What a dog. There's always a moron, someone to hate, a corporate tie, a wig and a date, just a dog. These blackest of years that have no sound, no shape, no depth, no underground, what a dog. Full dog is cruel and smart. Smart time breaks the heart. Full dog bombs the moon. A devil in a marketplace. A devil in your bleeding face. Full dog bombs the moon. What a dog.